Greetings, ladies and metallurgists, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Lesson on Communication from a Human of All Things, written by Random 3X.
Call for my next tutor and see if he has a lesson for me,
the Elven Prince ordered with a long sigh, looking at the terrified minister who just delivered bad news on an order that had been poorly fulfilled by one of his nobles. A few minutes passed as he continued to stew over the report when a knock at the door finally rang out.
"Enter,"
the prince ordered without looking up from the report. "Greetings, your highness. I am your new tutor." Entering his room was a human man who gave a deep genuflection towards the young royal. The prince glanced up at the man and immediately exhaled. Another person too eager to get in his good books. The prince pointed out a finger at the tutor. "You have bowed too low." "I have not, your highness. A bow of this depth is in greeting," the man replied, moving up to an acceptable height. "But the height I gave is for when the other is of a much higher status."
"I see,"
the prince replied, gnawing on the end of his pen.
"So what is it that you are to teach me and the others could not?"
"Wisdom, your highness." The prince couldn't help but let out a snort of amusement.
I have plenty of wisdom already."
"Do you? Perhaps you believe that, but I suggest that anyone who believes himself wise is merely a fool."
"Are you calling me, the prince of this here Sylvan Forest, a fool?"
"On this occasion, yes. As a tutor, I would hope to educate you. But if you do not wish me to, and desire to remain a fool, albeit a learned fool, then I shall take my leave, as this position no longer interests me."
"You would do well to watch your tongue,"
the prince snarled as the pen in his script began to bend. It was as a swirling frustration bubbled to the surface he struck upon an idea.
"Very well. I shall put you to the test, tutor. Should you fail, I shall cut out that spiteful tongue from your treacherous mouth."
"I'm yet to hear what I get if I would."
"Simple. You get your life and continue to work."
"Very well. Please share your test." The prince grinned as he moved the report he was given of the noble's failure and spun it so the man could read it.
"Give me the reason this failed and how it could be prevented."
The man approached the desk and read over the document. The prince waited for him to confirm the noble had failed and needed to be executed. But to his surprise, the man did not. "Can I see the document containing the order when it was given?"
"Why, it is clearly stated here in the report."
"What is written here may differ from the original order." With an exasperated sigh, the elven prince reached into a drawer and collected the original order. Just as he knew, the order was clear as day to anyone who would read it, proffering it to the human he waited. The man began to give a sagely nod. "I see this man is clearly a fool."
"I agree,"
the prince replied, a smirk growing across his face. "You agree that you are a fool, your highness?" The prince's smirk vanished in the blink of an eye as he stared at the man, mouth hanging agape.
You dare to suggest this failure is my fault?"
"I do indeed, your highness."
"Explain."
"May I tell the story?"
"What?"
"Your highness, may I tell the story to help explain my reasoning?" Intrigued about where the standing dead man was going, the prince waved his hand to indicate for the human to continue. "There was once a wise king who no one would ever disobey."
"Such as a king I shall become,"
the prince replied, puffing out his chest in pride. "One day, he received a letter from another king, telling him that this other king's subjects were so loyal they would do anything he ordered. Not one to be outdone by another, the king called for his most loyal and wise noble."
"Did he plan to order him to do something?"
The man nodded. "That he did. You see, when this noble stood before him, he asked him a question. Pausing, the man squared his shoulders as he put on an imperious voice. "Nobleman, would you do anything I ordered you to?"
"As is his duty," the prince nodded.
The nobleman replied, "Of course, my king. Should you order it, I shall cut my own throat." The prince let out a sigh of admiration.
"How loyal."
"I suppose." Hearing this, the king looked at his most loyal follower and was struck by an idea. Why not order him to do just that? He could tell his rival king that his subjects were so loyal they'd even kill themselves for him.
"You don't mean?"
Indeed, this king ordered the nobleman to cut his own throat.
"Did he do it?"
"No," the man replied, shaking his head. He said,
"My king."
"I apologize, but I cannot do such a thing."
"But he's just said—"
the prince began before pausing, seeing the man holding up a hand to stop him. The nobleman explained, "I would be glad to cut my own throat as you ordered, but I have no blade with which to do it. If you would allow me to use one of your guard's blades, I shall follow your order."
So the king gave an order that wasn't within the noble's capabilities at the time.
Yes. The noble himself was loyal and willing, but he did not have the means to carry out the order.
"Is that the moral of this tale?"
the prince asked, unimpressed. "No, there's more," the man chuckled. "When the nobleman was given a dagger by a knight, he held the blade to his throat, looked at the king, and asked, 'Is this truly your desire, your majesty?'
So he quibbles.
He wishes to ensure that it was his king's true order, not one made in a moment of error. I can see on the documents that the noble requested such clarification from you, your highness, yet only the response was, 'It is obvious, is it not?'" The prince couldn't help but click his tongue at this point.
"So, what happened next, then?"
"He ran a blade across his throat, letting blood spill forth."
"He actually did it."
The prince failed to hide the shock in his face. "Yes, a cut across his throat," the man replied, running a finger along where he imagined the blade cut. "A cut so shallow that a cut shaving would be felt worse."
"So he deceived the king and didn't follow the order."
"No, he did. The king ordered he cut his own throat, and he did. This was the king's third failing."
"Third?"
"First was not ensuring the order could be fulfilled. Second was ensuring that it was not an order made in error. Third and final error was not clarifying the depth that he desired, but simply he left too much to interpretation."
"I see. The nobleman did technically cut his own throat, but it was nary a nick. The nobleman was not told to cut deep, so he took the option to best favored him and his opinion."
"Exactly. Now, your highness, please look at the order you gave."
"Yes, it says, 'Take care of the village that birthed a rebel.'"
"And what did the nobleman do?"
"He lowered their taxes as they had a poor harvest."
"Why did he do that?"
"Because he was a fool."
"No. He asked you for clarification on your order, your highness. You ordered he take care of the village, no doubt with the intent of seeing it razed. But he lacked troops, so he did not have a way to deal with it. So he requested clarification so that if needed, he could request troops. But you told him that it was obvious what you mean. So, with the resources he had at hand, he took the option within his interpretation."
"So this is—"
The prince swallowed back the rest of his words. "Yes, it is your failure. You did not communicate. You expected everyone to see it from your perspective and ignored all requests from a loyal noble for help to see it your way. And you intend to punish this man."
"I see. Leniency shall be better here. I submit, human. You have taught me a lesson. Are all humans like this?"
"Hardly. We have these lessons, yet we tend to fail to implement them. Though I hope you will enjoy my lesson and implement them better than the human royals that I have taught." End of story. Story number 2. Generally applicable, written by Bailey Master. Gadropi entered the common area of the researchers' collective. A dejected aura hung about the scholar. Every possible physical indicator of defeat bound about the alien's long, lanky body. 3 of Cadropy's peers immediately picked up on their classmate's mood, their bodies tightly tuned to the vibrations of the room.
Cadropy, what's going on? Has something happened?
Cadropy slumped against the stress pad. You know my thesis?
Of course. Optimal design of physical appendages. The tutors are quite taken with it.
Well, I'm afraid it's done. The disbelief in the room was palpable.
Done? You barely even scratched the surface of your research block.
What do you mean?
How can it be done? There are still calls to revise your first milestone report.
Cadropy stretched, nearly splitting at the seams. That's what started it all. Tutor Velepini made a remark on how the pinching capacities of the Vol...
Oh, I'm so taken with that race.
We know. Continue, Cadropy. Thank you. That their pinching capacities were eclipsed by a small species recently introduced to the court.
No, what species is this?
Humans, unassuming looking things, but they're AT-meter. That is absurd.
Applicable tests.
There's barely any information on them at the moment. But every time I research the appendages of another race for my thesis, and I do mean every time, there is, unfailingly, a footnote that refers to a source of humans doing the same with their hands.
Come now, they can't be that versatile.
Surely it is a technical error. Remember when the Alec complex was mistakenly linked to every reference point?
Cadropy, you're drifting. To point, if you would.
Cadropy lay motionless and stared dead ahead. I've studied over 80 different limb endings and all of their various methods of interaction with the environments. All this with the sole aim of defining which one of them was the most useful for the most tasks. 79 of them have examples of a human hand performing said task in the xenoparallel section. The majority of them submitted by some Klein researcher who goes by the name of Ashai.
Perhaps this researcher has some bias towards humans.
Bias or not, the evidence remains that human hands can, indeed, approximate the vast majority of interactions. Cadropy had grown tense while speaking, then suddenly deflated. How can I create proper tension in a thesis with so obvious a winner, with such vague information as well? Cadropy's peers immediately jumped to prove their peer wrong.
Surely they can't pull objects.
But their hands, they are over 8 different variations of grasping and pulling.
What of the Kenley method? By using the hairs on their bodies, they can hold items through infinite application of friction.
Humans can do the same thing, albeit on a smaller scale. The hairs on their hands can hold tiny objects. It's assumed that their hair grows to keep pests from their flesh.
Suction?
They can create a vacuum with the palms of their hands.
Traumatic insertion?
They've shown the ability to jab into and through stage 4 materials with their fingers.
Cutting?
They have fingernails.
Abrasion?
Their fingerprints act as a fine abrasive.
Fine motor skills.
Cadropy looked as though he would cry. Don't even get me started.
Differential force application.
Tactile sensory feedback.
Blunt bludgeoning.
Cadropy rose from the stress bed, then threw itself down on it again for the sheer drama of it. Yes, to all of them. It is a nightmare. The young scholar gestured wildly with stubby limbs that served as hands, so wildly incompetent compared to the topic at hand. They can supinate, pronate, push, pull, crush, strike, craft, write, draw, build, twist, fan, swim, crawl, hang, balance, hold, support, arc, identify Jenna. It's absurd. Cadropy's peers fell silent, struck by the implications. To have a singular answer to a thesis without strong arguments and counter-argument for discussion did not bode well. To submit such a thing might as well be the same as submitting a statement of fact and expecting others to argue against it, which wasn't possible. One of Cadropy's classmates spoke up.
There is only one thing for it. You need to change the basis of your thesis.
The other 2 classmates recoiled in horror as Cadropy exhumed stress. There's no other way. If things continue this way, I'll have to declare intellectual bankruptcy. Cadropy's classmates gave the words of encouragement they could.
I'm sure the tutors will be understanding if you present the evidence.
To have such a lovely thesis so cruelly taken away from you. A tragedy, complete and whole.
If only this race hadn't presented its appendages so callously.
Cadgerby winced. They have those too. Cadgerby stood and left the room of the collective to begin reframing its thesis. Those humans and their damned hands! End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons: Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Bushmaster 177, Lord Azrakal, Ambrose Cattell, Quantum Wednesday, Trixoon WRE, and Blueberry Cat. Thank you very much for the support. It is super appreciated.